Yeah. So I really think the session from yesterday there was two. One of them was a detailed coaching of Griff Cooper as he moved from last year's effort of really maximizing the value of kata 2. I mean, he went through a whole series of doing kata 2s, one pattern at a time each day, symbols, and then writing the course that would teach other people how to develop their own system by how he developed the kata 2 into a. So, sorry about that. All right, so the session from yesterday had a good long hour of coaching Griff. So this was not coaching a trade, but it was really in systems and where he was in life. So he had, I think, really gotten all the value out of the kata 2 effort of focusing on one pattern a day on a couple different symbols, turned that into a personal system, and then moved to the next level to develop a course to teach it, which is how you really learn your system, and is now set as his goals this year to work on chain trading, where he's taking the three patterns, the supported spring crossing, and then the kata twos to the upside, the continuation patterns, and then the supported spring crossing, and if that fails, into a collapsing dragon, and then kata twos to the downside. So he's going to work on all of that and talking him through his one page, master strategy chart turned into a pretty good hour summary of the nuances of the chain trading and essentially sniper trading. The importance of compound critical states. And really, I wanted to go back to one of Sunal's comments about, is the channel wide enough to trade? Last night's discussion and demonstration of why it needs to be 4 MMRBs between the peak and the stem of the RL10 is, I think, really worth listening to in detail. And it explains why you need to have 4, because you're going to give up a box on either end to get into the trade and then give back a box getting out of the trade. So you still have to have 2 in the middle in order to justify the original trade for 2-to-1. If it's that wide, you can trade inside the channel. If it's not that wide, then you have to wait for the collapsing dragon or the emerging dragon. So that puts it into a precise or measurable mode. So I want to just highlight some of the big things that jumped out to me from what you guys. Anyway, if that was the first hour, the second hour was a demonstration of going through swing trade framing and some of uh, the the reasons why having a personal herd of targets is really crucial to being able to pull together pieces of the market and sector condition. So I want to point out for Kyun, I think it was, sometimes we advance in steps in a linear fashion. Other times we advance in jumps. And when you make a jump for a big move, you have to land and gather yourself and reset and then go again. So it's not one or the other. There are times when we make those big jumps. Other times we're just marching along. And the feel for the rate of change or the rate of improvement is different in there. And we really need both of those things. One of the things I noticed you guys got out of watching Tim being coached was you watched the trader and you watched the coach, and then you ended up imagining yourself in both modes. And uh, from that disinterested position, you actually are learning things about what you want to do for yourself. How can I adopt this or that different approach or mindset, or add that piece of strategy or technique to my own work? Just do yourself a favor sometime. Go on YouTube and watch steam trains when they first start off and what it's like to raise steam and get that first chunk, that first break of friction that generates the momentum, and feel how that thing's going. It is relentless. Just to Ernie's point about even when we are vulnerable in a true story circle and we trust our trust and others to not be judged, it still sometimes will happen. And so that's part of developing that rhino skin, and that's part of the joy and pain of trust, that will happen sometimes. And then you still have to decide whose advice you will take to heart and consider making changes, and how many of them are, it's just, well, that was well intentioned and they needed to say that. So that says everything about them and nothing about you, except that you're willing to put yourself in a position to offer trust to others. And that will help you deal with the times when you get surprised like that. I was not surprised when you related that. Yeah, I remember my judo teacher saying, "Hey, the judo mantra that, in the middle of when you're on the mat and throwing each other around, it's you and I shining together." Well, that's right. Yeah, when you're pushing each other to the limits, it's you're actually getting better. And I would just say, yeah, you got to have skin in the game for the trust to be meaningful. If you're in the true storytelling circle and somebody says something like that and it doesn't bother you, then it maybe wasn't that valuable a circle anyway. Unless you're in a position where you've got skin in the game, that's part of the risk you take going in there. So what's the 1 hour loss in a true story circle? For Jeff, I think something we'll end up talking about is the idea of the abnormal goodness and abnormal underperformance of a system over time, and that statistical treatment is, hey, taking that 30 trade trailing expectancy, and then putting the RLCO framework on that to know when you are within performance boundaries, and when does it become abnormally good, so watch yourself, and abnormally bad, so is this the time to reduce the exposure. So we got to know, not just for a system, but for the portfolio management, what is the 30 trade trailing expectancy. And that's where I think you're going to find something interesting about your work in progress, about running the 5 simultaneous systems, because you're going to be evaluating the 5 different curves, but you're also going to be monitoring the 6th curve, which is the blend. Because then once you have those characteristics, your genuine system, the true system, is the asset allocation between simultaneous engines. Yeah, and I liked your point. But of all the things that you see in a coachable moment, it's finding the actionable step that has the best payoff. So you're really making a judgment about the expectancy of the coaching advice that you're about to offer. Like when I told Tim earlier, like last week maybe, or sometime this past week, hey, put the Z3 lines back on the sniper so that you can see when you're in the channel and you're just making sawdust. And that has to do with, he's taking trades inside the channel, and it was not 4 MMRBs between the peak and valley of the RL30, which you could see if you had the Z3 lines back on. And then that's a way to start avoiding the normal convergence after a big move. So after a big move, you found the mover, and then you want to start taking those next couple trades. At some point, the Bollinger Bands pinch, and then when you get within 4 MMRBs, you are in the normal sideways quiet channel, which will chew you up. It's not until that thing further compresses into a Z3 pinch that you can then start taking those breakouts. So that's an example of trying to make a judgment about, of all the things that I could invite him to explore, not all of them, but which is the one that, if it pays off, has the best return on investment over the widest range of futures, and then concentrate on the next most important thing. So that's sort of the coaching mentality, is that you have a working list of all the things, and you're trying to decide when to release that to the player. Yeah, when I look at Tim and his coachability, and I already mentioned, how does that inspire you to be more coachable? I mean, it also inspires me to want to be a better coach, to match that level of professionalism and respect. For Sanal, I'd be thinking about the difference between teaching, coaching, and mentoring. And if I say teaching, I'm thinking about training. I'm telling you what to do so that you can wrap it, so that you don't have to extend your learning curve on things that are obviously transferable at the skill level. Hold your arm like this instead of like that. You won't hurt your elbow and you'll be aligned with your shot. Just do that. But then there's other ones where the coaching is you're inviting the player or the trader to explore their own space where there is really choices on what to do, and you're trying to get them to learn to self-regulate by adopting a coaching eye. And then mentoring is sort of the most hands-off thing of all, in which we're just exploring ideas that are still under development. Which frontier am I going to go explore? So something like that. And then as far as changing the programs that are running in your work in progress, what is the reliable signal that the suboptimal subroutine is about ready to run, that behavioral loop that once I get into it, I just got to live through it, and I don't want to do that. One of the ways to think of that is through managing stress, the physiology of stress, and heart math teaches a technique of identifying, what is the physical signal that in about 20 seconds I'm going to get hit with a wave of physical stress that I can prepare myself for now to just regulate. I can do a couple deep breathings, slow my heartbeat, pause what I'm doing, lock in my stop, get my hand exercisers ready until I go live through the 3 to 5 minutes of stress that's going to come from a well-known trigger event, which is a spike of a reaction, of a surprise, and say, oh, it's going to trigger all of that behavioral loop of worrying about this or that I don't want to process. Well, breathing monitors and other biofeedback devices can help with that. What you're really talking about doing is taking a learned or an issued subroutine. Where do those come from? Well, from our past, and substituting a better program to run. So if you think about programming mentality, it's just, I want to call this subroutine because it will preempt the other subroutine. And then we want to get at the other end, after a subroutine, we want to release the memory so that we don't have any residual artifacts in there that will gum up the machine, gum up the program. Well, that's the equivalent of psychological clearing from past memories or operations. If our biological response or psychological response to some kind of stress event has little particles that have not been processed and cleared, suddenly those are in there occupying our RAM, and it can trigger in unexpected ways. So one of the things you do in good programming is to clear the deck of all evidence of that thing and release all the memory back to the pool, and so that you fully turn off a subroutine. So we got to find ways to make intentional behaviors that allow us to periodically clear, and that we need cleansing rituals that allow us to release all of the accumulation of emotional charges over time. And for me, the owl meditation is exactly that thing, which allows me to just quickly get back into the psychological zero state with no carry forward. And to Tom's point about the human brain being naturally restless, I think of that as it's just not trying to not be restless or turn that off, except when I want to. But I think of that as a diesel engine. When I'm working and I'm taking a rest as a driver, it's cheaper and better to keep the diesel idling, because the startup cost is large, and you want to keep that thing ready to work. And I was wondering, maybe dreams are the way that we get ready for immediate action upon waking up, that our biology is sensing the world around us, and those little triggers are making the brain just go through calisthenics. Maybe that's all the breathing or all the dreaming is. so that when I wake up, I'm instantly ready with a mind that's warmed up and ready to go. So people that are good in the morning, maybe that's what their brain is like. I don't know. And I would just tell you, I also I looked at the Tim video to just check myself on the kind of advice and insight I was given a year ago, and say, well, as I listened to myself giving advice, where was my cringe factor, or what was really good, or was I doing things better back there, or I forget how to do this or that, and just as a way to coach the coach in that sense. So those were my notes. I have a really good a good model that I'll be adding later tonight that talks about, since we got a day off tomorrow. It was an aha moment triggered from creativity and talking about it with the students about the creation of effective decision making for a chaotic world that has to do with your skill with trade-off decisions. So imagine the first one being art versus science. So you need to be really good at art, I suppose, and really good at science, I suppose. And then somewhere in the middle of that, there is a region in which it's necessary to blend art and science because it's a fuzzy situation. And then you can say, what is my skill at properly blending art and science in order to meet the requirement of that moment? So there's actually a third dimension in there that at the balance point. And then if it starts at a single point, you start expanding that into a circle and say, what is the region within which I am competent at blending art and science? So that little diagram of a two-headed arrow with art and science at one end and that zone in the middle, I want to enlarge the space within which I am competent at properly blending art and science to the needs of the moment. So I'm trying to respond to the environment in that sense. And now imagine a north-south arrow that has theory at the north and practice at the bottom, so that practice is grounded in the earth and theory is anchored in the clouds. And then I have that same circle that what is the right balance between theory and practice? If I need to be good just at theory to create good theories and then to derive potentials from them that are implied by the theory, which I can go experiment. But I also need to be well grounded so that there's an inductive process from which many case studies I can start to infer a hypothesis and then a theory, and so I can discover theory through the accumulation of cases. So it's that practical space in the middle of practitioner-scholar or scholar-practitioner, depending on which place you started from. That is also a region in which I need to be able to blend the trade-off between theory and practice. If you put both of those models together, the north, south, east, and west, you now realize that zone in the middle, there are times in which it's complicated enough that I am blending art and science and blending theory and practice. And then you realize, if there's two dimensions, how many? Okay, I can run a third dimension through there and now call that risk reward. How good am I at estimating rewards, and how good am I at estimating and managing risks? There is a practice, there is a science of practice of identifying and managing risk. So now suddenly I have this three-dimensional thing in which I can look through all of these lenses at once, and all I'm trying to do is decide which of the trade-offs are the important ones for the particular problem that I think I have. I could have a trade-off in the fourth dimension. What's my default state? Am I looking at this as a problem to solve or protect against, or am I looking at it as an opportunity to seize and exploit? In my urge to fix problems, am I missing opportunities? In my urge to seize opportunities, am I missing the problems? So how am I blending the orientation of problems and opportunities inside that complexity space? What about time frame? Am I looking at tactical short-term time or long-term time or the midterm, or am I blending? So once you start looking at that, you see that it looks like a little porcupine, of effective action in the middle, and all of these trade-offs running through your brain at one time. And so now there's an N+1 skill set, which is the ability to harmonize and recognize all of those trade-off decisions that are happening simultaneously inside you and that are pulling you in one direction or the other. How many of them do you routinely have to go through in order to assess what's going on in the situation? And while you're doing that, what can you do from a practical term and practical point of view to quickly get to no lose plus dinner for two? So at some point, you sort of have that non-thinking instinctual action to recognize and act on the pattern because it's good enough. And now I can think about the other ways that it develops while price is unfolding. So there's this little discussion and insight came to me walking from my office Wednesday night towards the car, which is about a half a mile away, getting my steps in. And the visualization of this thing, and I couldn't sleep very well the rest of that night. And then had the discussion, Friday morning with my students and drew it out on the whiteboard, and they were saying, "Up, it's a Dr. Long hairball. Here we go again." So, in many ways, the effective executive in the world, making decisions with real resources, under constraints, under uncertainty, trying to be professional in that domain, you have to contend with the fact that there is some region beyond which you can compute. That's part of this environment, that you're making all those trade-off decisions dynamically, because as the environment changes, what you thought was the important trade-off is no longer the most important trade-off. So I think there's always some most important trade-off dimension that is governing the next adjustment, and then there's some checklist that you go through while you can to quickly check those other ones before they become problems. So it's very much the spinning plates and the juggling balls of complexity, and that's why I think watching those plate spinners is a really important kinesthetic, physiological, emotional model to recognize exactly what it feels like to be within the zone of control and competency, and when you're as you're approaching the boundaries and when you need to make some adjustments. So I most closely connect that to the whole idea of span of control. It really does come down to what is your span of control for the number and types of trades in what time frame, and how many variables are you looking at for that system to feel like it's under your direct management. Not saying that I'm controlling the trade myself, but I can manage the trade with this many targets and this many variables at once. And so the simplification to the sniper indicator set was one of the ways to reduce that complexity down to assessment. So I think we're always moving in and around that exploratory, very practical space of the trader's mindset. So I wanted to share that with you. Imagery to follow. Right? So that's what I want to say for work in progress. And I really want to commend to you the yesterday's 2-hour session. I just thought it was one of the better ones I've ever done. So so there you are. So the tones will lead us into the listen for the words. And then I got to be out of here in about 15 minutes to get over to soccer. It starts at 1. So listen for your word and get ready to report.